So part of being willing to investigate is to be willing to touch what we've been running away from. There's a line, the truth will set you free, but first it'll make you angry. I like that. I think that it really makes sense. So a story for you. Baba Yaga is an old woman with a wild hag-like visage who stirs her pot and knows all things. She lives deep in the forest. When we seek her out, we are frightened, for she requires us to go into the dark, to ask dangerous questions, to step outside the world of logic and comfort. When the first young seeker comes quaking up to the door of her hut, Baba Yaga demands, "Are you on your own errand, or are you sent by another?" The young man, encouraged in his quest by his family, answers, "I'm sent by my father." Baba Yaga promptly throws him into the pot and cooks him. The next to attempt this quest, a young woman, sees the smoldering fire and hears the cackle of Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga again demands, "Are you on your own errand, or are you sent by another?" This young woman has been pulled to the woods alone to seek what she can find there. "I'm on my own errand," she replies. Baba Yaga throws her in the pot and cooks her too. Later, a third visitor, again a young woman, deeply confused by the world, comes to Baba Yaga's house far into the forest. She sees the smoke and knows it's dangerous. Baba Yaga confronts her. "Are you on your own errand, or are you sent by another?" This young woman answers truthfully, "In large part, I'm on my own errand, but in large part I also come because of others. And in large part I've also come because you are here, and because of the forest, and something I have forgotten. And in large part I know not why I've come." Baba Yaga regards her for a moment and says, "You'll do," and shows her into the hut. So what do we make of this? In a way, you can kind of intuit that there's an attitude that really is behind all spiritual practice. And it's an attitude that intuits a mystery. And so that when we begin to have that basic interest, and it's really a profound kind of fascination in what is reality, our questions come not from an intellectual kind of trying to find out so we can make things safe for ourselves. They don't come because we want to prove we're knowledgeable. They come from this deep sincerity that wants to know truth and has a sense of openness to the mystery that we just don't know. It's like unless our hands are open, we really can't receive. We really can't touch truth.
A philosopher arguing with Socrates in one of those rigged boxing matches that Plato was always setting up. And he says, "How will you go about finding that thing, the nature of which is totally unknown to you?" And I feel like the kind of research that it's part of why I don't really want to be like those big deal historians who have assistants do research for them. You can send someone out to find what you know is out there, but you can't send someone out to find what you don't know is out there.
And the great pleasure of having finished a project and not having quite settled on a new project, I'm interested in rivers and deltas now. Well, I'm going to read about the 1927 Mississippi flood. I'm going to read about the Niger Delta. I'm going to read about Amazonia. And I'm just going to let it, to pursue that metaphor, I'm just going to float on the waves downstream of all these great rivers for about 6 months and read books for the pleasure of where they're going to take me. And I'll be taking notes. But I treasure this period when I haven't narrowed it down. And it's not clear to me what's relevant to read and what's not relevant to read.
Mm-hmm. I had part of my interest in wandering around in open spaces, whether it's mountains or boulevards, is also about that encountering the unexpected. The way that new ideas develop, the way that you run in, and literally running into people on the street, running into things that lead to things, etc. That kind of free mingling that people have been really afraid of in a lot of ways. It's or dismissive of. It's often described as dangerous.
Whatever I read, I take notes on. And I mean almost whatever I read. So I'll be taking notes on parts of the New York Times if I find something particularly interesting. And I keep, in a sense, an intellectual notebook on a particular theme that I'm interested in. And it piles up, and it has a lot of ideas. Again, most of which are trash, but some of which turn out to have pay dirt. Although I'm not a card-carrying anthropologist, the reason I have anthropology envy is that I actually think that the close observation of anything in the world will pay tremendous dividends if you just simply pay absolutely rapt and persistent attention to it.
And we can see in our education system, and it's a sad commentary, that that the way our children are taught and the way we are taught will really has an effect on whether we just kind of grab at knowledge or whether there's a deep inquiry into the nature of what's true. And we know what happens when it's rote. So let me speak a little as to what wise investigation is not. Clearly it's not rote learning, it's not kind of grabbing onto information. It's definitely not analytic. There's a lot of a tendency, I think, in us to investigate and then say, so what's going on right now? And then try to say, well, my mother treated me this way, so it's making me do this, but then has another person do that. So we're kind of going through a story. And it's not, and an investigation's a much more immediate quality.
It's funny because I don't think, we have so much stuff about detectives, and we have a million cop shows where they have to figure out who did it. And really, for me, library and archival research has a lot of the same pleasures and excitement. There is this thrill of the chase. But there is this amazing thing when you start to put together things nobody's really connected before, and really see the past come to life in some way. And often, it is like solving crimes. It is figuring out who did it and what, but also what it meant and why it happened.
And the inquiry allows us to notice what we might not have been paying attention to. As soon as we ask the question, the real changes, and it doesn't matter what inner weather system we notice, the change is that we notice. We become aware of what we weren't aware of.
My vocation is looking at these kind of larger patterns and tracing them. And there's a kind of detective work and moving across these areas, looking at the evidence that lets you think about a whole shift in imagination or emotion, culture or something, about a tendency, about why is the left so prone to despair? Why are people so disembodied? If privatization is an economic force, does it have to be an emotional force first? And what does that privatization consist of? And, so these kinds of things.
So I try to convince my students to do field work in this class and to do something, right, that will force them to encounter a world they're not familiar with and to encounter it in a sustained and careful, persistent way. So
it's striking to me that that's the immersive experiential aspect, which, however powerful the mind is, the encounter with difference of the realm of ideas is very different from that kind of immersive encounter.
Right.